And in a once-in-a-lifetime moment here at sax.co.uk, we actually have not one, but two contrabasses in stock. Over to my left is this rather giant and fantastic looking ORSI contrabass. And further over here, we have the Benedict Eppelsheim TUBAX contrabass, which is, believe it or not, exactly the same pitching as the ORSI over there, but it's just in a completely different physical format, as you can see, and I'm going to get into all of that in this video. But actually, before I go on and talk a little bit about the history of these two instruments, because it's quite an interesting story for each instrument, I just want to point out that we did a bit of a fun duet covering a Lizzo track. I was playing the ORSI over there, my colleague Jamie Anderson was playing this, playing the melody. If you haven't seen it before, we'll put a link up to it over here. But in the meantime, let's just talk about the history of these two instruments. So back to this one, the big boy, the ORSI. So we acquired this from a studio in London. We got a call from the partner of this player here, his professional player, a chap called Rupert Clahar, who acquired this instrument in 1974. In fact, it was made specifically for him. And as you can see, it's a rather interesting looking chap with a fantastic studio and environment here. Very proud of his instrument that he's been playing for decades, but he's unfortunately too ill to play it now. So they contacted us and asked if we would like to sell it for them. So that is exactly what we're doing. It's currently on sale on our website for £17,500. And I didn't actually go to the studio myself, my colleagues did. They said it was a really interesting day out. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff there, giant sea shells, a giant anaconda skin or something like that. But nestled in amongst all the weird and wonderfuls was this wonderful ORSI sax. So we are now selling it for them, and it looks absolutely great in our store. So that's the ORSI. And then back over to the Eppelsheim. So we've been selling these for a number of years now, whether it's the TUBAX version or just the bass version, just half an octave below it, or the tiny little soprillos that this one-man band Benedict Eppelsheim, based in Munich, makes. So he's this amazing engineer. He spends literally his whole time hand building these instruments, and this is a hand-built contrabass. It's taken him 2 years to make this for us, and as you can see, looks absolutely splendid with this hand engraving contrasting against the black lacquer here. So yeah, just a wonderful instrument, an amazing company, if you could call them that, because really it is just Benedict and a couple of helpers, but two contrasting instruments, as you can see from my opening description there. So let's get into it. I'm going to do a bit of playing. I'm going to talk about the ergonomics, the playability, because they are quite different, and I'm going to explain how in just a moment. Okay, so let's dive into the ergonomics first of all, and the hand positioning actually. So in terms of hand positioning, first of all, it can't go unnoticed that my left hand is way up here, approximately the same height as my head. So that presents an interesting initial challenge. You have to get used to holding your arm like this And you might get a little bit of shoulder pain if you're going to play it for a while, but I suppose you do get used to that. But it's just a very bizarre playing experience at first, having your hand up here, and literally you cannot see what your left hand is doing. Not that you should need to see what you're doing if you're an accomplished sax player, you just feel for where the keys are, and it just takes a little getting used to in terms of the spacing, where your table keys are, in terms of reaching for them. Once you've got used to it, you're kind of up and running. So that's that side of things. I should just point out with the bis key, that also took a little getting used to for me. It was a little distance over this way, so at first I was missing it, but once I got used to where it was, I could sort of successfully play the bis key and then roll down to the A and all the rest of it. Down on the right hand side here at the bottom, the F, E and D keys, very comfortable actually. They feel like they're in a good position down here, so no shoulder ache going on there. And you can just see these massive levers here connecting to the buttons, which are necessary in order to make the whole thing operate. But it feels like a good spacing to me, and the positioning of these side keys here is pretty good. All this works very, very nicely indeed. In fact, it's actually got quite a nice light action down there. So quite impressive overall, considering it's got a fairly crude look, you might say, in terms of some of the key shapings and the ergonomics, but it actually feels okay. So that's this one. Now, moving over to the TUBAX, there's a whole different vibe going on here because this instrument in general is so much more compact. For a start, the tube just wraps around itself twice, hence it's half the size essentially, physically. But it just means in practical terms, it's easier to get your hands on it and play without having to stretch your body into all sorts of strange positions. So I love this, the fact that my right hand is just here, right in front of me. My left hand is just to the left and spaced slightly higher. And it all feels really modern and slick under the fingers. Everything is spaced beautifully. I'm sure there's some interesting variations of the Boehm system going on here in terms of various cantilevers, like here. If we can just pan around here, you can see on the side keys you've got these extra sections here, these extra rods allowing these keys to open. It really is a feat of engineering. And on the back here, just by my left hand thumb button, we've got the usual octave key, but below the octave key we've actually got, it might look on first appearance like it is a low A key, because we think it looks like a baritone and all the rest of it, but in fact it is not. It is a third octave key, and you can see it operates this one up here. I've not really got into exactly how that works for me, but you can tell that when you play those upper notes and you play and you press that button, it is giving you some assistance up there. So Benedict really has thought of everything in terms of the way this operates from an ergonomic standpoint. So just absolutely fantastic. Now, moving on to the playability side of things, this is where the two instruments have their own story, really, if you like. I mean, for a start, it's very obvious to see that with this huge bore here, you would imagine it's going to give you a very different tonal result, and it is absolutely true. The sound on this ORSI is just sort of earth-shatteringly huge, absolutely room-filling, and it's got this mellowness to it and this breadth to the sound, and it sounds nice and melodic in the upper reaches as well. It does take a fair bit more air to fill it, so it really is a workout for the diaphragm. Whereas when you contrast it with this instrument here, exactly the same pitch, but you hear a lot more highs in the sound. It's more of a pitched sound, but it is so free blowing, and that simply comes down to this very narrow bore. You can see the bore is extremely narrow at this point, and it continues to run all the way down here in the same narrow format before the cone gradually opens up to the release point here. And right here, I mean, this just to me looks like a very similar sort of width to a tenor bell, whereas over here it's about twice as wide, so completely different physically. So as I say, as a result, this one plays much more easily. It's free blowing, it feels just like an oversized baritone to play. But in terms of the tone, because of that, the tone is much more focused, it has a certain brightness to it, but it still really sings out. It's got this nice soaring nature, and the bottom notes, when you really relax on it, still have this nice fullness. So it's a very flexible, adaptable instrument. whereas this one really feels like the machine that is just going to give you that thumping bass line with such a physical presence to it at the same time. So both wonderful in their own ways. So that's really it in terms of the performance, the ergonomics. I suppose maybe a word on their practical use, because you might be looking at these two things and thinking, well, why would I buy a contrabass? For a start, they're a lot of money, which I can totally understand. But I would say that the contrabass and the bass instruments overall, the bass downwards, they have sort of hit a bit of a resurgence in recent years, in that there are many ensembles out there that utilize the bass and the contrabass instruments because A, the sound is just so fantastic, as hopefully demonstrated there, but B, it's such a quirky and interesting thing to add to your ensemble. And it's not the sort of instrument you're going to be taking out on a regular basis and gigging at the weekend. For a start, they're very impractical. They have huge cases and you wouldn't want to be doing that. But perhaps it may be an interesting instrument to have in your studio. If you're a sort of studio kind of guy and you want to record some interesting sounds, it could be a permanent piece that sits on display in your studio to fulfill that criteria. So overall, just wonderful instruments, completely eye-catching and something completely different from the regular saxophone range that I talk about all the time. So there you have it, two completely contrasting contrabasses, the ORSI and the TUBAX. Thank you very much, guys, and I will see you on the next video.